Hi painters, so in this demonstration I'm going to show you how to paint your first sphere, and that should get you started, and I think from there you should be able to finish the last two. So you can see what I have so far. When you watch the first video you can see how to create a value scale of one color at the top of your page, and when it dries you'll be able to see the color change a little bit more clearly. So be patient, let it dry for a second, and while it's drying sketch out an outline of the box and the sphere inside and the cast shadow of each of the examples, and they should be roughly this size. I wouldn't go smaller than this because it just becomes difficult to paint, but that's what you need to set up. I have my water cup, my paper towel, and my brushes here, and I'm gonna get started. Remember, if you're a right-handed person, you should have your materials near your right hand so it's easy to access. Same if you're a lefty, you put the stuff on the left. So I'm gonna get started, and when you're looking at your object or your sphere in this painting at practice, everything that is light or white is gonna be a very light value, like these, and everything that is really dark will be a darker value. You don't need to add black. If you're feeling adventurous and you want to do it, or you want to mix two colors, go for it. But like, just my basic requirement is that you're using one color and a range of light to dark values without adding black. So I'm going to get started. I have basically a blue here. It doesn't matter to me what color you choose. You can use any color you like. With a little water on my brush and a little bit of color. And I see this area is lighter, so I'm going to just start applying a lighter layer of color. My pencil marks are pretty light, but they could actually be a little bit lighter than they are. They might still be visible when I'm done. So I just made a wash over the entire thing. And now I'm going to go back into my color and wipe this off a little bit. I'm going to add more blue over here and just let it kind of bleed out. This paper dries pretty quickly, so you don't want to have a line in the middle. So my strategy for that is that I'm going to actually just wipe my brush off. Try again. I'm going to add a little water to my brush and go right between the dark and the light. Try to pull over that a little bit to get that. So I'm rinsing my brush off, dabbing it on the paper towel, and then I'm trying to let a little more blue settle over there. I'm gonna grab a little more blue color, a little more here, drop it in and let it kind of spider out a little and see how it spreads out. The darkest part should be here, and there are a few of those little craters in there, but that's something I would do after it's dry. So I'm constantly going between my water and my paper towel to control the water, but that looks like it's gonna fade out pretty evenly. So that's nice, easy peasy, right? Done. So I'm gonna let that rest for just a second, and then I'll go on to the cast shadow area that has darkness right at the base, the balance point shadow, and then it gets lighter. There's a light reflected here, and then it gets darker and sharper up there. So I'm gonna let this dry for just a second, and then I'll move on and try that. I'm starting to notice a little bit of a line there, so to get rid of it, I'm gonna dip my brush in water. I'm gonna try and go over that. So I don't want it to have a line right on the highlight area. Well, if your highlight gets too dark, you can find a clean part of your paper towel and lift a little bit. But my paper is already dry enough where it's not really gonna do much good. You can also use a clean brush and try to lift a little color off if things get too dark. So that would help. So first part kind of done. Now here at the very base, I'm gonna need to make my values touch, so I have to really be careful. If this part of the sphere is dry, then I'll be okay to just add right next to it and they won't bleed together. But if they are both wet and I touch them together, the dark blue will seep into the light blue. So if that's not what I want to have happen, I have to be patient and let this dry. We're not going for perfection here. We're going for a good solid practice. Each one will get a little easier. Okay, so wiping my brush off on my glass. Right down here, I'm going to add this tiny bit of color. Now this blue should be really, really dark, and it's not as dark as I want it to be yet, but I'm going to fill in this area with the color that I have. After it is where I want it to be. Then I'm going to grab a little more blue and drop it in right here so it's slightly darker. And I'll just let it bleed out on its own. Those little spider bits right there telling me it's spreading out on its own, and hopefully it'll work out. If I don't think it's moving enough, I can kind of get involved with my brush, kind of work over it, dipping in my water, dabbing on my paper towel, just kind of messing with that transition. So far, I think that's probably as dark as I want it to be. I also notice it's a little darker over here in this corner, so I'm going to drop a little bit more color over here before it all dries. And I'm picking it up with my brush. Well, the top part of this cast shadow, because it's curving, cast shadow goes up on a curved wall. It's a little darker at the top edge, and then it gets lighter again as it comes down. So I'm actually just going to rinse my brush off, dab it on the paper towel, and remove some color right here. And I keep going back to my paper towel to just dry off my brush a little bit. Cool, so that looks like I'm pretty happy with that. I'm gonna call that okay. And then my last step for this is to paint the background. Now this is where things get a little bit tricky. There's more to it, right? So I don't want my ball to disappear. I want the background to be visible. So I'm gonna try to keep the values slightly different. The gray at the top is darker than the ball itself, and actually all through gets a little lighter here, and then it's all about a medium blue there. So I'm gonna try and make a little more color, and maybe I'll slightly change the color just so I have less stress. Maybe if it's blue-green, it'll work out better for me. So I'm mixing a little blue and green together. I'm gonna test my color up here. I think it's about that dark, but I'm not sure. This is definitely okay to try to test your color. I usually keep a scrap color paper around so I can fill things in. So now I'm gonna go across the top. I'm gonna actually add more water to this. And I'm gonna be pretty careful that I'm working pretty quickly. Ooh, that's a lot of water. I'm gonna spread that out. Seems like we're gonna be okay. You don't want to stop in the middle of this and walk away, especially if you're just creating one big area of color. And this paper dries pretty fast, so if you want to make things darker, you have to work quickly. I want it to be darker over here especially. Let's see how that looks. The top corners seem a bit darker. This is our first attempt at a whole scene, so don't stress if it's not going perfectly. You're just working it out. I'm trying to pay attention to the gaps between things. And I don't want to leave a lot of white space, so And then right here it gets a little darker again, so I'm going to grab some more blue. And then spread this out a bit. You might not always know what to do. Sometimes you just have to go for it and guess. And then just by practicing, you'll figure out what works and what doesn't. Kind of trial and error, a lot of painting is anyway. So I'm going to call that kind of done for now. I'm going to let it dry, and if I want to come back and add stronger darks to it, I can when it is dry. But those are your basic steps.